The opportunities in Australia, clearly industrial is the sector of choice at the moment. One of the things I think we're going to see more of, and this might be where the opportunities are, rents in industrial in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane.
Business owner and investor, managing director of One Commercial, the most awarded commercial property agent in Australia, father and family man.
Welcome everyone. Today we have a special guest, Josh Charles. He is one of Australia's most reputable commercial agents, and he is the managing director of One Commercial. And he is definitely someone that you want to hear speak. He has a lot of knowledge and a lot of insights to the commercial property market, but he's also a business owner and investor, and obviously a father and family man. So I'm really happy and really lucky to have Josh here. So Josh, welcome to the WTF podcast.
Thanks, Will. Pleasure to be here. It's been something that I've seen you guys building recently, and we're looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll keep this pretty casual, and with all my guests, we like to just have a nice conversation, just like old friends.
Yeah, which we are.
Which we are.
I've known you for about 20 years now.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And even though I've known you for so long, the audience probably doesn't know you for that long.
Sure.
So could you give us a bit of an intro on yourself and what you're doing these days? But most importantly, how did you get into commercial real estate? Why did you choose this career?
Yeah, it was a while ago now. I knew pretty early on from basically high school that real estate was for me. When I was actually back at high school, I started volunteering in year 11 and 12 at the local residential real estate agent, opening homes for them on the weekend.
Right.
And then that got me a job straight out of high school into a local residential firm in property management. And to this day, I think that was a big part of my career. At such a young age, being able to learn how to deal with and talk with people. So that property management job was in a firm in Hurstville, and that firm also had a commercial division.
Right.
So I got a bit of exposure to commercial at the time.
And what year was this?
This is 92.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So I spent about 2 years at that residential management job, and I got to say, to this day, it was one of the most enjoyable parts of my career. I loved it.
Yeah.
And
what did you like about it?
just you've gone straight from school to I'm out there talking to people. Funny, this is a story I love to tell. We had about 1,500, 2,000 residential property managements.
Okay.
And there was this one guy who used to come to the office. He'd be in the office 2 or 3 times a week, and he was in his overalls and they were covered in paint. He owned over 200 apartments.
Wow.
So it was one of those life lessons that I learnt really early on, that never judge a book by its cover, and certainly not in our industry. But I just loved it. I loved the meeting the new people part. You're always out and about. I wasn't stuck at a desk, and to this day, that's a big part of what I like, is getting out. And our market's a lot bigger now. We cover off all of Australia and parts of New Zealand, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Yep.
But from there, I actually moved into Collier's. In their South Sydney business, and that was a great learning curve. I was surrounded by some really successful agents at the time.
And how did you make the transition from resi to commercial?
It was something I was out there looking for at the time, and I sort of put the feelers out with somebody I knew, and then that got me an interview. And I think I'd actually had long hair at the time. What I didn't say is I had a year off in between. I went overseas, grew my hair long.
Okay.
Picture it if you will. And so somebody I knew had said, look, we're looking for somebody. So went and had an interview with them, then had another one. I think there was 3 interviews, and the last thing I remember was they called me, the boss of the office called me and said, how attached are you to your long hair? I said, I know it's got to go. So that went, and I started there. And I think I was with Colliers for all up just under 9 years, and the team that we had there was just incredible. I ended up becoming their youngest director at Colliers ever.
Excellent. What age were you?
I was 28.
Okay, yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Probably still a record.
Yeah, might be.
Yeah.
And what's funny is, because I'd built so much momentum, and we might go into that a little later, it was harder to build momentum at the time. CBRE were nowhere near the size they are now, and CBRE had seen what we were doing in that market. They only had a very small presence in that market. And, every 3 or 4 months, the CEO of CBRE kept calling and saying, listen, can we catch up? And I'd love to have a chat to you. And then one day he just got me on the right day. I remember very clearly, I was on the way down the snow and went and had a chat with him on the Monday. They needed a new managing director, someone who could take their South Sydney business and supercharge it. Mm-hmm. And I started there probably about a month or 2 months later.
Okay.
And I ended up being with CB's for 11 years. Then from CB's I went to Cushman Wakefield, mm-hmm. where we worked together.
Yes.
And that was an interesting time at Cushman's. Again, they were new to the country. They were trying to supercharge that business, so they got a few senior guys in, yes. and we're really trying to push that business to new heights. Yeah. Very difficult time in when you had so many established players, and then comes a global brand like Cushman's, who were actually number 3 in globally. The US, yes. and Europe. Yeah. But in Australia, a lot of people had never heard of them, and when you're trying to recruit people locally, that was very difficult.
Yes.
But even more difficult when you're going to see clients and they're like, well, who's this Cushman and Wakefield group? So I was there for 2 years and it just wasn't me. You'd remember at the time, mm-hmm. my job then was more administration. Uh-huh. I was the managing director of the capital markets group, which is industry jargon for large investment sales, and, yes. and managing director of all the New South Wales sales, leasing, research at the whole group. But 90% of my time was really trying to reorganise that business. Some people had to be moved out of that business and we're trying to bring a lot more people in. So my job and what got me there was my sales and leasing skills, mm-hmm. and I wasn't doing any of that really.
Yeah.
And that didn't really sit well with me. I didn't really enjoy it.
And I want to just touch on that for a moment because, obviously you're someone who's very seasoned in the industry, yeah. and you've started in Resi, and you've gone to Colliers and CBRE, Cushman Wakefield, so you've experienced that whole process, and obviously now you have your own boutique firm.
Yeah.
When I speak with a lot of high-level executives in the real estate business, they always often say to me what they miss the most is doing the deals.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yep.
And do you believe that to sit in an executive level in one of these large firms, it is important that you keep doing deals?
Yeah, so I've got some real experience at this, and the funny thing is, the successful guys in the global firms end up getting promoted to these roles where they're taken away from what got them there in the first place. Uh-huh. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you've got someone like myself who, at CBRE, for instance, I was the managing director of the South Sydney business. I started there with about 6 or 7 people. In the space of, I think, 3 or 4 years, I got that to 35 people.
Wow. And
the second most profitable office in all of the Asia Pac region, behind Tokyo. So Tokyo was the most profitable, and then the South Sydney.
And the South Sydney.
Yeah,
yes,
believe
amazing.
it or not. Yeah,
amazing.
That's on a net to grow on a percentage.
Sure.
And so that obviously shows people up the chain that, hey, this guy's got something, he can run a business. So after about, I think it was 3 or 4 years, I was then moved to run the Australia, New Zealand, all of their industrial and investments businesses right around. So I've gone from a small geographical patch of South Sydney through to running, I think we had about 30 offices around Australia, New Zealand, and in my business there was hundreds of people. So that was a real change, and it came with a lot of different challenges. And I think the biggest thing was at CBRE at the time, there was a very large expectation that the managing directors of their business units, of which I was managing director of one of their biggest business units,
yes.
Were still responsible for writing their own revenue. So we want you to make that business work, we want you to recruit, we want you to retain staff, big piece of it, but we also expect you guys to be some of our biggest fee writers. And I think since then, what has started to happen is they've started to bring in, you've still got that the job I was doing, the managing director of the whole group, but now you might have a general manager under that who's taking care of, some of the team issues or some of the marketing and, those type of things. And I think that...
So less deal focused, more business admin focused.
Taking some of the admin off those guys that were the superior agents that rose to run those business lines. So taking some of that admin out of the way so they can get back on to being, day-to-day active agents. But the reality is, back then, and I can laugh at it now, running that business with, 30 offices, let's call it, and, 2, 3, sometimes more, 100 people. Clients used to say, look, we want you to work on this, but are you going to have time? And the reality was I was probably, and I still think this is the case today with guys in these big firms, I think I was probably 80% CBRE things, running the business and internal meetings and going to Singapore or going to New Zealand, at 20% deals. So the good part about where I am now is I would be 90% deal focused.
Okay.
All client, is this helping our client? And the other 10% is just helping oversee some, whether it's marketing or accounting, but we've got people to do all of that.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah, it's an issue that has plagued the commercial real estate industry for a long time. Take your best people, put them into management positions. A really good example, if you don't mind, just my brother was a police officer.
Okay.
And he was a police officer for about 18 years. He became the youngest chief inspector in New South Wales. And after 18 years, he then quit. And I said to him afterwards, what happened there? And he said, well, I wasn't a cop anymore. I was an administrator. I was doing rosters and dealing with HR. So it's a very similar sort of situation.
Yeah.
And I see it now since we've started our firm.
Yeah.
I'm back on the tools, doing deals, I'm listing, I'm with clients, and it's what makes me tick. I love that part.
Yeah, great. And you've been very successful because I've noticed lately that One Commercial has been appointed on a lot of large assets, between $50 to $200 million assets.
Yeah.
So, and you're obviously working on a lot of them personally. So what made you different than the big players out there, the CBs and the Cushies and the Colliers out there? Because traditionally they're the ones that are doing these big deals.
Yeah.
So how has One Commercial and Josh Charles positioned themselves to take on that?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question, and the good news is, from our point of view, is everything, without exception of those larger institutional sales that we've been able to work on, has produced an outstanding result for our clients. So we're then able to show that to more and more clients, and they're seeing, and what they're seeing, and this is some of the things that they're liking, is they like the impact that a sale of that size has on a firm of our size. So by that I mean, if we're doing $100 million instruction, a sale for somebody, and in our firm, we won't have 10 of those going on at one time. And where if you're dealing with a global firm, they may have 6, 7, 8 of those going on at one time. And I think clients are wising up to the fact, well, how proactive can they really get? Agency will, if you're not actually being proactive, picking up the phone, getting on the front foot. So there's that's one of the biggest differences. I think the other differences are people are seeing that we're really nimble. They like our marketing. They like what we're doing with it. We can get into corners that others can't. The social media piece has been a really big influence for us in that, what One Commercial can do in that social media space, and the intel and the data that we're getting in the background, I would argue strongly that none of the global firms can do it because of their global branding guidelines. So if I was still an agent at CBRE or Colliers, there's no way I could be on social media doing and marketing the way that we are.
Yeah.
So that's a bit, and you know what's funny? I saw an email from a client to his boss saying, we're going to appoint ex-global commercial, along with One Commercial, and the value of this property was close to 100 million joint appointment, which at anything over $50 million, you start to get two agencies appointed. And so I saw the paper justifying his decision to his boss, and it was we love their energy, the sale. We want to throw the cat amongst the pigeons. We want to get this, these two firms competing, and the reality was on that particular occasion, we brought the buyer to the table. And it really vindicated the capital transaction manager's decision to go with One Commercial. We work really well together with, whether any of the firms. We've got this happening all around the country, and the reality is it's worked really, really well, and a lot of institutional buy-in to what we've been doing.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want
just on that. Can I just in the we looked at this at the end of last year in South Australia. Recently, One Commercial, we don't have a South Australian footprint, fully licensed it, but we don't have a footprint. We had more on the go in South Australia than the Adelaide agents.
What do you mean by on the go?
More listings and sales and leasing.
Why is that?
I think it just, we've got clients that are wanting to work with us, particularly if it's a sale, for instance. So about a year ago, the largest vacant possession warehouse in Australian history came up for sale. So the largest vacant possession warehouse in Australian history came up for sale, 65,000 square metres. That was owned by Lendlease. We were appointed on that to run it out of Sydney, and Knight Frank out of Adelaide. So they covered the local bases with Knight Frank, and they wanted to cover the national coverage through One Commercial, and it worked perfectly.
That's very unusual, because usually the other way around, right? Usually you appoint the local small agent and then the global national agent.
You might think so, but there's one thing's really, really clear to me. Whenever we walked into an institutional listing tomorrow, and let's say we already had it, and we were appointed with a global firm, and we sit down there, and this is one of the things I think groups are working out. Out comes a list of buyers from everybody. 95% of those buyers will be on my list, will be on their list, and so we're getting into those cracks with buyers that maybe other groups don't know. And in a market like this, where the institutions have backed off a little bit from buying due to interest rates and everything that's going on, it's those buyers that you really want to find. We finalised a sale just before Christmas at French's Forest. We're appointed by the third largest institution in Australia, exclusively, not jointly. We're appointed to take this large investment business park to market, and we sold it to a private investor that, frankly, most people would have never heard of.
So I want to touch on that, and I want to talk about the social media piece in a second as well. So what I have noticed, and to your point as well, is a lot of institutions, they're not spending right now. I mean, obviously the share price has not been affected since COVID, particularly firms that's got more heavily weighted, in the office sector. So where are some of these investors coming out from? And I think, and I also want to have a follow-up question about foreign investment as well. But
sure.
Let's talk
I think they're connected.
So can you talk about that?
Yeah, they really are connected. So Australia, as an investment property market, commercial investment property market, is probably one of the top 3 most regarded in the world. So
why is that?
Because safe government, regulation is high, but it's still manageable.
Transparent.
There is, the tenancy market is extremely good, and we are actually more sophisticated in our property structuring and type of property than most places around the world. What a lot of people don't remember is Australia was the second country in the world to institute compulsory superannuation behind Germany. So a lot of the structuring of these things has been around for a long time, and the yields, even though in the last 18 months, 2 years, some of our yields have gotten to levels that some people might think were never achievable, the reality is they're still higher yields for the buyers than, say, places like Paris. So comparably, you've got these groups sitting atop the world, and they're allocating funds to Asia or the Pacific, Australia, Europe, US, and it goes everywhere. But insofar as our property markets, it's a really safe bet. And we're seeing more money, just even in the last 2 weeks being back from Christmas, we do the rounds with all the major institutions. It's amazing how many of them have gotten new money to get out the door in 2024.
And these are all foreign investment.
A lot of foreign investment.
Yeah.
A lot of foreign investment.
Yeah, because I read that the Japanese actually purchased majority of the retail assets last year.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Back to the 80s we go.
Back in the 80s we go. They might be buying up cans again. Yes. So who else are emerging?
I'll give you an
besides the
example,
Japanese?
without naming names. There was 2 major industrial investments acquired in the month before Christmas. It's a local platform, and this is how it normally works. So there'll be a local platform, but on that occasion it's US money.
I see.
Okay, a lot of money coming through Singapore. Most of the money here comes through Singapore. Does it initiate in Singapore? No, but there's groups like CPBIB, the Canadian Teachers Superannuation Fund, for instance. They own a lot of property in Australia. The Meat Industries, Superannuation Fund. So these are where the money comes from in Australia is mainly superannuation funds here, or there'll be foreign governments, as I said, superannuation funds, and just a lot of like BlackRock, Blackstone, all of that type of thing.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So obviously we're talking about the top end of town here, so to speak.
Yeah.
$50 million plus sort of assets.
Yeah.
What about the second tier, the $50 million and below?
Yep.
Who's buying up those properties?
Well, you know what? It's really interesting you asked that, because if you go back a year and a half ago, the institution would probably only buy to a minimum of about $30 million. And then what started to happen was 1 or 2 of them said, you know what, that space between 10 and 30, it's either privates who generally want to get a good deal, like a better deal than most, so they play a bit more hardball. But some started to go, you know what, that space is pretty clear. So you had some local syndicators and institutions saying, we're going to target that space. And that's what's happened. So in the last 18 months, maybe even 2 years, there's 5 clearly identifiable institutions buying property, even as low as $5 million, up to $25 million, with the idea, one of them in particular has, they want to aggregate as many as they can. They want to get 200 to 300 of these things and then sell it off as a portfolio.
And, package it up.
Australia is running out of, institutional grade stock. You can most people buy it and then hold it as long as they can. But those people who are holding, they've all got money to send out the door as well. So go back to your question, 50 million below, so let's call it $20-30 million. There's still most people in Australia would be absolutely blown away if they knew the amount of super high net worths who made their money in commercial real estate. And those people are still there today. You know it, you've seen them, you've dealt with them. There's people out there that you would walk past on the street sitting on $1 billion worth of property that nobody's ever heard of. And there's not just 1 or 2 of them, there's a lot.
There's a lot of them.
Yes,
that's right. And look, most of my listeners and audience are in that high net worth category. And a lot of them are just starting out on commercial property. So they're savvy resi investors and resi developers. Now they see the light with commercial property. What would you tell? What would be your maybe 1, 2, or 3 top tips for someone that's just coming into commercial property? Maybe they've got $10 million to spend. What should they buy? Where should they buy? What should they focus on? Where are the markets heading to for the next 2 to 3 years?
It's a really interesting question, and it's a tough one to answer, quite frankly, right now. 18 months ago, I was telling people 2 years ago, I was telling people that M5 corridor out through Padstow and Bankstown and Milperra, and then that jumped by 100% in some cases. Like land values literally doubled in some of those areas. Right now, it's there is part of me that sort of wants to sort of look at the office markets. Is there opportunity there? I saw an example this morning from Washington DC, and I track the US markets pretty closely because we, what happens there, we do get a bit of. There was a building just transacted in Washington DC in the last week for $25 million. Last time it sold was $145 million 8 years ago. So, but then you've got the repurposing issues and the rental market issues. But the opportunities in Australia, clearly industrial is the sector of choice at the moment. One of the things I think we're going to see more of, and this might be where the opportunities are, rents in industrial in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, Particular place, I'll give you examples in Sydney. Some of them have more than doubled in 4 years. More than doubled in 4 years.
Yes.
That's the net rents.
Yes.
And then add to that the outgoings as well. You've got outgoings that maybe in some cases used to be $35 and now $75. So the all-in costs for a tenant are becoming massive. So we're dealing with a group at the moment and they're going regional. So coastal, North Coast.
And what's driving that?
Well, cost is driving that. You can acquire the land cheaper. The roadways are exceptional. And the main consideration is for them transport costs, which can be massive. But I don't mind the regional story. I'm not so much saying like full-on country, but just that hour out of Sydney. You know, we've seen it. Expansions down around Wollongong as well.
Yep.
I think that North Coast piece it could play a part in it as well.
Yeah. So Newcastle, Maitland.
Yeah. So much so that we've actually just recently opened a Newcastle and Hunter region office.
Yes. Can we talk about it very, very quickly?
Yeah.
So why and who's running it right now?
Yeah. So why? Tied a lot into what we're putting our money where our mouth is. In fact, of what we just spoke about with those markets. There's a lot more sophistication to it than most people in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane would give it credit for.
When you say sophistication...
Well, the markets have, the office markets there are really developed and the product is incredible. Governments like moving, they're spending a lot of money and moving their actual departments to these places. So, and as I say, in the industrial space, and I think it's kind of still in its immaturity stage, which any investor should like. Sydney's just outpricing people. So where do we go? What's the next best thing? You've got, a large proportion of Sydney's workforce coming to and from Sydney, or certainly pre-COVID, commuting day in, day out. I've got friends that live on the Central Coast and having to drive down every day or catch the train. So if they could get work closer to home, it's a win-win all round.
Right.
So we've got a gentleman called Brendan Saroff, who's now heading up that for us, and it's all very new. So our intention is to expand that and look forward to seeing where it goes over the coming months and year.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, we'll circle back to your offices and what your long-term vision is for One Commercial. But I'm really interested to have a talk about advice for young commercial agents.
Sure.
People who are just coming into the industry. Maybe they've studied a Bachelor of Property Economics, and they want to be a successful commercial agent like yourself. So, what would be your advice to them? How should they get the foot in the door, and how important is it to have the right mentor?
Oh, look. So we're specifically talking about young agents. So a couple of things. In terms of, like, if you're just starting out, my advice would be what I spoke about before. Go and find somebody who's really successful and offer to work for free. Get yourself into that position where you're sitting next to somebody who is extremely successful. They've been there, they've done it, and you get that look behind the curtain at no cost to them. Now, if you're any good, you should be able to, in a short period of time, become such a resource to that person that they don't want you to go. And then all of a sudden, voila, there's a job offer.
Yeah.
So I know look, in America, that's very, very common. Here, not so much. But
why is that?
I think that whole intern thing in America is just part of business. But
Yes.
in Australia, I just, it's like tipping. In America, it's part of the culture. And but I think the reality is, if you really want to do something, you're going to get a look in, you're going to get to know these people. But three, you're going to work out really quickly if it's for you or not. So nothing ventured, nothing gained. All right? There's that. I think the other thing is, and I, to this day, I get a lot of younger people in the industry, oh, can I grab you for half an hour? I've seen what you're doing. We'd really love to have a chat and see what's going on and what can I do and the advice I would give to people. And I had a really large client of ours approach me not long ago, and his son, 19 years old, wanted to get in. And I said, listen, I think the first thing you've got to do is just go and do some of that sort of property management work first. Just learn the ropes, fresh out of school, like what I was talking about I did. that's how to get in. One of the things I will say, Will, is I've had a lot of success over the years with hiring people, not necessarily in commercial real estate, but out of other industries. Residential, commercial, very similar, but the deal turnover is completely different. Those, I think people like, another guy I can remember, software salesman. He was with Microsoft and came and worked in commercial real estate. Now an extremely successful commercial real estate developer. So I think if you've got some good life skills, you and I both know that this business is one of the most highly competitive industries out there, commercial real estate.
Yes.
If you're going to do it, you really have to want to do it. Because if you don't, there's enough competition out there who do want to do it that they're just going to outwork you. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Like today, my competition, my personal competition, they're the best in the business.
Yes.
And we're all trying to outwork each other. And there's enough out there for everyone, but you've got to want it. Yeah. I think presentation, first impressions, is a massive thing.
So when you say presentation and first impression, the way you dress, your mannerism.
Yep.
And
so look, first impressions. Someone walks into me we're still talking about. Someone walks into me to come and have a chat about a job. Might seem a bit old school, but I certainly don't think it's going away for certain industries. Suit, tie, bit of research background on me.
Yep.
Same as when I'm going to come to a podcast or I'm going to see a potential new client. There is zero excuse for not having some background on anybody in this day and age. Everyone's got a digital footprint.
Yes.
LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, whatever it is. You can do some research. Newspaper articles from a successful potential client for us from 10 years ago. I'll know that stuff before I walk in. So if you're looking for a job in this industry and you haven't been able to show me some of those things, the only thing you have shown me is your lack of resourcefulness
and preparation.
Yeah, you won't last.
Yeah.
So,
well, I want just a quick question. I'm just curious. What's the most impressive interview that you've experienced? As you're the interviewer.
I'm hiring someone.
You're hiring someone.
Okay, that's a really good question. I haven't been asked that one before, but it's a really clear answer for me.
Okay.
And you've had him on your podcast. Daniel O'Brien.
Okay.
So Daniel is a really interesting example of tenacity, and I want it. So Daniel used to work in a residential real estate office that managed some residential properties for me.
Okay.
And I had to go to their office on a couple of occasions to sign some documents. And Daniel saw me coming and going and reached out to me afterwards and said, "Listen, what do you do?" And I told him I'm working commercial real estate, and he basically said, "I'd really love to come and work with you." And
I think he mentioned he saw a few cars that you were driving, and he was impressed that you came in a Merc and then next day came in a Porsche.
Anyone who knows me well knows I like my toys. But that's all, for me, that's another side story. That for me is part of my motivation. If I do a good job, I reward myself.
Excellent.
It's not for anybody else. It's purely for me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I don't think so.
But right now, I drove here this morning in a Toyota Kluger. So you can have those things, but you can also keep it real as well. But yeah, Dan did see that. I didn't want to mention that part, but he did. And so then Dan reached out to me and said, "Look, I really want to come and work with you." And I sort of suggested we didn't have anything going at the time, but he didn't take no for an answer. And Dan turns up to my office unannounced, and he'd been online on every website. He turned up with what looked like a telephone book of listings. There would have been at least 500 pages there.
So he printed all out.
He printed everything out. He said, "You take a chance on me, and within a couple of weeks, I will have spoken to every one of these people." And I did. I took a chance on him, and it was one of the best hires I've ever done. He's gone on to be incredibly successful and a very good friend.
Yeah, excellent. So he still ranks number one in your
in the stories of recruitment. Yeah. There's a lot of them, but that's got to be the best one. He just wouldn't take no for an answer. He changed my mind.
Yeah,
and I loved it.
Yeah,
and looking back on it now, we all have a laugh about it. But he took the path less travelled, and came up with an idea.
Yeah.
And it worked, it paid off. Dan went from selling $300,000 apartments in Mortdale in southern Sydney to, I think, within his first month and a half, he sold a building for $28 million in Rosebery.
Yes, he mentioned that's his first commercial deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your first commercial deal?
My very, very first
Very
commercial
first one.
I found this recently. I found some old books, and I'm going back to the days when we didn't put it on a computer. You kept your log of your deals. My very first deal was I leased a shop in Padstow to a chocolate manufacturer, a mum and dad chocolate shop, and the leasing fee was $200.
Wow.
Yeah.
No way.
First deal. Yeah.
Nice.
So look, we all had to start somewhere, and it's important to remember those times.
Yes.
I think I remember my first sale deal where I listed the property and sold it by myself. That was at Collier's, and that was. Do you remember Don's Small Goods?
Yes.
Is Don is good?
Yes.
They had a small fridge, freezer, and processing plant in Waterloo. And I remember listing that and then selling that, and the building's still there today, believe it or not. And that was, I think, that was for $480,000.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So,
what would that be worth today?
Oh, at least $6, $7, $8 million.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So, what's the biggest sale you've made?
So, look, probably one of the most interesting large sales I've ever been involved in, and I think to this day it's still a record, was we were asked to sell a fund, a total fund.
Okay.
Normally they're done by investment banks.
Yes.
But this particular group, it was Australand, wanted to sell a fund, and that had 8 or 9 office and industrial assets in it all around the country. And most of the time when you see commercial real estate agents doing a portfolio, it'll be the sale of the direct assets.
Yes.
So the actual, the contract will be made on each asset and they'll transfer to the new people.
Yeah.
But on this occasion, it was the sale of the entire fund. I think that one was about $300 million.
Okay.
That's probably about, actually, it was 2013, I think it was.
Okay.
One of the other larger ones that I really enjoyed was the sale of the Qantas global headquarters down at Mascot.
Yes.
So that was 4 office towers and a warehouse there. That was $170 million.
Okay.
Today that thing would be worth 400. So there's been quite a lot of those, and to be honest with you, they're not necessarily. They're good because
it's good profiling.
The profile's great, and the fees that come along with them are great.
Yeah.
But far from my favourite sales. I've got favourite sales that'll stand out forever.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you 2 questions. One is, why were you appointed on those 2 particular transactions, and what's your favourite sale?
Yeah. Can I go to the favourite sale first?
Please. Yeah.
So one of my favourite sales again was probably around 2012. Do you remember when Bunnings and Masters were fighting?
Oh, yes.
Like Masters were just started up, and they were trying to get their foot on as many sites as they could. We were employed by AMP to sell a site at Marrickville in Sydney.
Okay.
And every agent that pitched, including ourselves, said to AMP, look, you'll probably get 9 to 10 million, maybe $11 million for this. And AMP decided to appoint us. But what we did at the time is we put in there a success fee. So you had your base fee of, on $10 million, call it, 2%. And for anything over, I think it was $11 million, I know it was $11 million, we got an additional 10%. And we got Bunnings and Masters, and they just kept outbidding each other.
Right.
Not an auction, it was an EOI, but they just kept upping it. And it got to $20 million. So the fee went from a potential fee of $200,000 to, I think it was just over or just under $1 million.
Wow.
Yeah. And it wasn't even necessarily the fee, although that was fun. It was great.
That was a great result, though.
But, to be able to show a client that put their trust in us that we could handle that, so much so that, some might have just sort of said, okay, that's the best we're going to do it, $14 million. And, some people are in a hurry just to get the contract signed and take a fee and move to the next. Not us. That was a really that was really satisfying.
Yeah.
And we just had another one of those recently, actually, in Queensland, where we were appointed by one of Australia's largest institutions. And this is a classic example where we were appointed with one of the other larger firms. And again, we don't have a Queensland footprint. They did. So we were appointed jointly with that global firm. And the value of the property was about $65 million or $63 million, the book value. And we were able to get just over $90 million or around $90 million for it. And that equated to, I believe, it was around 37% increase over their book value, which, as you know, a lot of these institutions live and die on book value.
Yes.
So for them to be able to go back internally and to their investors and say, hey, look, we've gotten you 35 to 40% over book value.
They're laughing.
Everyone thought that was just a great result.
Yeah.
So, and I'm really happy to say that that particular institutional client has now instructed us since then on 3 or 4 more properties.
So why did they appoint you in the first place? And how important is it to look after the client and do the right thing by the client?
Yeah, looking after the client is number one. It is so crucial. And that comes in many ways. If we're not communicating with our client when we're selling or leasing a property for them, then they might as well have gone with somebody else. The reality is sometimes what we need to tell them is it might not be what they want to hear, but that's what people know they're going to get from us. In commercial property, if you've got let's say you had a warehouse and it's been vacant for 3 months, but you know there's other buildings being leased, then they need to hear that they've either got to adjust their rent or there's a problem that needs fixing. On the sales side of things, the reason that we get feedback on why people go with one commercial, and I think that Queensland one was a classic example, they like our energy. We're going to get into the corners and the pieces and the buyers. We're going to shake that tree till there's nothing left to be shaken. And I had a client say to me recently, the reason that one of the things I love about you, Josh, is if you don't take my call or if I haven't gotten a response from an email within 20 minutes, I know you're either asleep or dead. Right? And that's great feedback from an actual client.
Yes.
And so that for us is a major part of it. Like we're not looking to go and take on 10 major sales at once. We want to do it and do it properly. And I just spoke to you before about that Queensland situation that where we beat the book value by 35%. That major institutional owner in Australian property has since given us 3, maybe 4 major assets to sell since then. It's actually 4.
And that's off the back of the success.
Off the back of that success, but it's not just, hey, the above book value result, it's the way we did it. It's the marketing we did, it's the communication, it's the energy, they can see that their business means a lot to us.
Yes.
Whereas if I'm a global firm and I'm juggling 10 things at once, that one falls over, it's not such a big deal.
Yes.
But for us, we're going to throw everything at
it.
Yeah.
How do you maintain client expectation? Because you just had massive success. You sold the property 35% over book value.
Yeah.
Now they've just given you 3 or 4 of their other assets.
Yep.
They're probably expecting same results.
Yeah.
They want you to sell everything at 30% above book value.
Yeah.
How do you then maintain client expectation without shooting yourself in the foot?
Well, look, I think there's a couple of answers to that. Is most people are sort of aware of market situations, so they didn't happen immediately straight after. So there might have been 1-3 months after that, and then 6 months. So we are able to have those conversations about different markets around Australia. Even right now to this day, you could get a different result in Parramatta than you might do in Wacol in Brisbane. So we're able to set those expectations, and I think most of the people we deal with on commercial industrial property do have some sort of understanding of where markets are sitting at the time. So and everyone, it's been said to death, but communicating, if you know your client well enough, you get in the middle of that sale process from when you're appointed to when it exchanges and settles, you're talking, if not once a day, sometimes 5-10 times a day, particularly around exchange, like a negotiation. We can be talking 3, 4, 5 times a day easily.
So communication's key.
Easily, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And I want to also segue a little bit about just how the industry's evolved
Yeah.
ever since you've been in the industry.
Sure.
I remember when I started, and obviously I started about 23 years ago. We had white pages, literally white pages and yellow
Yeah.
pages that would
Yeah.
flick through and
Yeah.
get numbers and all that type of stuff. Now we've got so much technology and software, websites, AI, and all that type of stuff. What have you seen to be the biggest impact on the industry? Doesn't necessarily have to be technological impact,
Yeah.
but just the biggest impact that you've seen in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah, there's a lot of things. There's so many wrapped up in that. I think one of the biggest things is that agents have become lazy. Not saying everybody.
Yeah, because
Now when you list a property, a lot of agents, even commercial agents at the big end of town, put it on the internet and just wait for the phone to ring. Why would anyone pay us for that? That's
someone told me that agents are just letterboxes.
yeah. I've heard that many times.
Yes.
That's the difference. That's where you can find guys that have been around, the longevity of successful agents. That to me is such a foreign concept to just put it on the internet and wait for the phone to ring. What am I being paid for? So that you go back to when I started, and I don't want to talk about the good old days, but there was no internet. We literally had to go door to door, knocking on doors. We do something called 3 street mail outs, which we still do today, meaning that if I list your property, your industrial or commercial property, we might not necessarily mail it out, but I'm going to talk to everybody in that street. I'm going to talk to everybody within 500 metres around it. The next, there's a thing called an out of line sale in commercial property valuations. You can't use the sale as a property valuation comparable if the next door neighbour or someone around it bought it. Why? Because they are encouraged that they're going to pay more for that property. So what's changed? So much has changed. Go back to when I was at Collier's. We had mobile phones, obviously, but we'd come into the office, we'd be out of the office for 4 or 5 hours, come back in, I'd have a stack of messages. So no one was advertising the mobile phone number, it was all the office number.
Right.
I'd come back in the office at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, being out all day. There'd be 20 messages from my secretary, you sit down, you call them all back. Then I'd go, once I've spoken to them, I'd put them into a card filing system, not a computer. So they're in a card filing system.
The Rolodex.
Who's your 10 hottest prospects, which we still do today? Who are the people that really want to get some money out the door? Okay. And when we were either prospecting for business or one of the best ways we would prospect for business, and again, we do it today just in a different way with a LinkedIn post, for instance. Sold something, we tell everyone about it. So back then we would go and we'd print out 500 letters. Today's the first day of the month. We'd put the third day of the month on them. So you've got time to take them home, sign them while you're watching television, envelope them, get them out in the mail. Every property we used to get a brochure printed for. Every property. Now, if we were doing some larger industrial leasing, the brochure would cost 20 grand, like we'd have fancy design, and then the mailing out, these used to be, we could target it through mail houses.
Active Mail
down at Tarrant Point. They used to charge about $1.50, $1.80 a piece. So if you're targeting, these campaigns on a major industrial property leasing campaign, and I can, in my mind's eye, I'm picturing 10 of them right now. Your marketing budget would be 70, 80 grand for a 10, 20,000 metre building.
What about
that was
now?
just part of it.
What about nowadays?
This is the thing. Most people will just go, real commercial or commercial real estate. Not us. We take a really proactive approach in terms of marketing with video, aerials, all that type of thing. We've actually been doing the old mail house type things as well.
Okay.
Our text messaging capabilities, again, I would argue they're the best in Australia for targeting.
So when you say text messaging, what do you mean exactly?
So text messaging, the data is in, it's well known. Text messaging is the most successful way to get your message through to people versus email or social media, but I'm talking direct message. So what we have now is platforms where we can put a video message on your phone of a property that we're selling.
Right.
And obviously there's a lot of laws around this, and we follow all of those. But all of these things coupled together, it blows my mind how many senior experienced agents are just waiting for the phone to ring.
And so they're not doing any of this?
Look, there's a lot of people not really unlocking the possibilities of today's marketing.
Uh-huh.
And you asked me before why we're getting so much business, even with these larger sales. People can see that we're on top of it, where we are using innovation and we're not just ticking the boxes. That will never be us, not so long as I'm involved in this.
Yeah. So how much of it is people wanting to work with Josh Charles, and how much of it is people want to work with One Commercial?
Oh, look, I think, when we first started out, I think, it was Josh. Let's be honest, there wasn't much more to it at the time. We've been really lucky in that we've attracted some really great partners and people into One Commercial. Just in the last 18 months, guys like Ben Byford, who's a partner in the business now.
Yes, I used to work with him.
Great guy.
Yes.
The level of detail and knowledge is just crazy deep. Arlen Domingo, again, he's been around for 20 years.
Yes.
Arlen is just one of the, his level of detail and knowledge on markets. And these are guys that have been around for as long as me, and they've chosen, they had options, okay, and they've chosen to join One Commercial because they could see what we're doing. Now, here's the kicker, okay? Both of those guys started in the last 18 months. Both been at larger firms for their whole career, for 20 plus years.
Yes.
Both in the last 6 months have done the largest sales of their career. Both individual largest sales.
Yep.
One of them was $100 million.
Uh-huh.
One of them was close to $45 million.
Yeah.
They never did those in the larger firms.
That's amazing.
That, to me, that says it all.
Yeah. So obviously you're attracting really good partners, really good talent.
Yeah.
And you're opening up a new office in Newcastle in the Hunter region.
Yeah, so we've got the Hunter region,
Yep.
Newcastle now. We've got Macquarie Park, and we're just fitting out our latest office over there now.
Yeah, great. And you've got your city office.
Many would say in the space of 18 months, we've actually probably now the #1 agency north of the bridge, which is incredible.
Yes.
We have an office at Roselle, and we're based here in the city.
Yeah.
And that, but it's really it's so pleasing to see with the platform that we've built, we've been able to retain the talent, attract the talent, and all of that's kind of a byproduct. But if this talent can go and do what they're doing, and I really can't get away from how pleasing that is. These two guys, the largest transactions of their 25-year careers have happened since they've joined One Commercial.
Yes. Can I ask you this? This might not be specific to real estate, but more from a business owner's perspective.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of agents coming out of the majors and setting up their own shop. And people like yourself be very successful. Daniel Bryan very successful, but there are also people who just stay as one man office. They've never grown.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why do you think that's the case?
Oh, look, I totally understand that as well. As somebody said to me, I don't claim this as my own, 3 years ago, small can be beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And small can be very profitable. And some people have just had enough of the BS that sometimes goes on in big companies, let's be honest. You just said it, like the amount of people filing out of some of the big firms, I've never seen it in my life. And look, I loved my time in those bigger firms. I spent the majority of my career there, and it was great. But you don't see too many guys sort of over 40, 45 in there, whether it's by their choice or somebody else's. So, and I think that kind of dawns on people over time. The other thing is, we're all so much more transferable now, Will. It was my job for 20 years to make sure nobody left these firms. Retention was a major part of my roles. So, and if you went and left one big firm and went to another, part of the piece back then was that, it's going to take you a while to get going. No one's going to know where you are. The reality is now, with the press of a button on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, I can advise everybody I've ever met where I am, and they can come and find me, and we can do business together. So everybody is much more transferable. I think people are just seeing that you don't need necessarily to have the big brand behind you anymore to be able to go and do these type of larger transactions.
Yes.
And I'm not saying everything's about large transactions, but there's groups out there like McVeigh Real Estate, for instance, okay? I think they've got 5 employees. They're selling, the minimum price point they sell at is probably $200 million. In the last 6 months before Christmas, they were selling hotels that were worth $500 million. You've got another group out there, Stonebridge, a couple of major employees who went out and started their own firm, very big in that retail and bulky goods space.
So they've carved out a niche for themselves. Yeah. How important is it, do you believe, to have your own little niche?
Look, I think there's pros and cons to it. You will see, I think the default position for when you're in a big firm, what a lot of people don't know is if you're in one of the big firms in Western Sydney Industrial, your market is probably about 10 suburbs. So what comes naturally to people when they leave those firms is to go back to what they know. Okay, and that might be where the difference was for me. When I left the big firms, my market was a helicopter view of Australia and New Zealand and parts of Asia. So that's why we might be doing so much business in Adelaide and Perth and Melbourne and Brisbane. Funny note on that, I think it was in 2021, we did more revenue out of Queensland with no Queensland footprint than we did any other state, including New South Wales where we're based.
Right.
Like, that's crazy. So I think it's just about, I've always been about setting big goals, and I could very easily go back to that sort of, okay, I'm just going to work that small geographical patch. But we've got clients that want to work with us, like what we're doing, and we've shown time and time again at One Commercial how working with us, even if it's jointly with another firm, how that can actually add value. One of the things I don't understand, and remember, this was my life for 20 years in the big firms, if a client's going to appoint 2 agents, why the hell would they choose to appoint 2 of exactly the same groups who are going to do exactly the same thing? And really pleasingly, we've started to see people cottoning on to the fact that we are a different offering. You can still have your safety blanket with one of those firms, but throw us in amongst the mix, watch what we can do. And it's really been working.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, just got a couple of more questions.
Sure.
I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the outlook for 2024.
Yeah.
Today's the 1st of February for those who are watching, and we're already...
Pitching a punch for the first day of the month.
And look, I mean, the year's really just started.
Sure.
What are some of the highlights you believe we'll see for the remainder of the year, and where do you think the market's going to shift? Yeah.
Okay. So I might just talk industrial to start with, and we can talk a bit of office, but certainly on industrial, there's 2 parts. There's the sale and the leasing. One thing is now becoming clear, although it's not getting too much airtime, is that industrial leasing has backed off in the last 6 months. It's not by any means dead. It's just the level of pent-up demand over the last 18 months, which saw massive historical rental growth, has now settled down. So we're seeing 24, and we can see it now. We were just talking about it yesterday in the office. There's a lot of vacancy coming through. That is already having, that is already having an impact on incentives.
Well, you're seeing a lot of vacancies. We're still hovering around 1% to 2%, right?
I don't believe that figure's true. I know I'm hearing that reported in a lot of places, so I don't think it's taking into account the amount of sublease space that's coming on the market. And even if it does, I don't think it truly reflects the amount of sublease space. So I do hear that number a lot. For the last 2 years, we've been well under 1% in most markets of industrial vacancy. In a normal year, just for a reference point, vacancy would be 5-6%. Okay, so if you've been an industrial tenant in the last couple of years trying to find space, you've been knocking your head up against the door. We've had situations where landlords have issued 3 heads of agreements to tenants with no rent and no incentive on there, saying you fill it out, and the first one to come back at the best deal wins. So auctioning lease property. That's over. I'm not saying we're going to see a massive drop in rents by far. We won't see that. There's still good tenant demand. we just don't have 5 tenants lining up for the same property anymore.
Sure.
So I think landlords are managing that vacancy. It's not as if there's a massive issue, but they're being smarter about it. Not necessarily every time there's a vacancy adding another 10% to the rent. Making sure that they're acutely aware of the competition and who might be cheaper than them. And that's where we come in and advising them, making sure they know that. If we get instructed by a landlord, we want them to be able to lease it. Here's what you've got to do. Okay? So there's that. On the sales point of view, it's a tale of two markets. So there are more active investors in the industrial space than people would recognise. And just in the last couple of weeks, while most people are coming back to work and we're doing our rounds, talking to people about what they want to do for the year, it's even surprised us just how many have raised new foreign money that they need to get out the door in Australia. And a lot of this can be use it or lose it. So I don't mean that they're going to go and do silly deals, but certainly even in the last 3 months of 23, the activity was good.
Okay.
All right. It's not at 22 level pricing good. Certainly interest rates have affected the yields, and that's what people are using as one of the metrics on which to buy the property. But there are more buyers than most people would think was actually the case right now. Then add to that, what happens when the yields blow out a bit, so prices come down a bit, is the private market starts to come out to play. And that's exactly what's starting to happen. So the people that we're talking with now about the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollar sales, there's a lot more privates in that space now, syndicators as well. So we just literally sold one the week before Christmas, $30 million on the north side, private buyer.
Yeah. Interesting. And what about the commercial market, the office market?
Yeah, so the office markets are a little bit more challenging. Obviously,
have we seen the bottom?
I don't think we have.
Okay.
The biggest issue, and we were literally talking about this in the office this morning, is how busy it seems around town. With the new year, have more businesses instructed their staff, okay, it's a new year, back you come. Okay? Because the norm for the last 12, 18 months has been 3 to 4 days a week. I can see it where I park on Pitt Street on a Monday and a Friday. I come in, I'm parking on level 1. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I park on level 3. Okay, you can see it on the street, you can see it in the food courts. And just the last couple of weeks, it's looking like there's more people around.
Okay,
maybe that's because there hasn't been any hot sunny Mondays and Fridays. But that's going to play a really important part. Whatever happens in that space, though, people aren't having the same leasing footprints that they once did. So building owners are having to offer, part of what I've seen is people trying to offer, better services in the buildings, massages, cooks, lots of concierge style services. So there will be a flight to quality, but the reality is there has been some fairly significant sales at discount to book values, well reported in Q3 last year in Sydney, for instance. So is that the bottom? Likely not. There will be others that will not necessarily need to sell, that will want to recycle capital. And the office markets are certainly, the office buyers are certainly looking for value.
looking for a bargain.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
If you're buying office at the moment, you want to get a good deal.
Yeah.
And I think not just a good deal, but you want to get something that you can do something with.
Value
So
add.
if it's just ramp up the leasing campaign and there's nothing to do, I don't see there's too many buyers for those.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, no, excellent. Well, Josh, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Will.
You've shared so much insight and you've shared so much sort of market sort of outlook as well. Really, really happy that you're here. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, where should they go? What's the best place to get in touch with you?
Pretty active on social media, as you know. So Joshua Charles 01 at Instagram and LinkedIn, active there. And I'm a lifelong real estate agent, so my number's all over the web. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Josh. Love to have you. I'd love to have you on again. Thanks, Will.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.